Hello, everybody. Hey, there you go. My name is Kevin Anderson. I am the proud son-in-law of Mr. Pete Moroznikov. Fortunate enough to be married to the lovely Natasha now Anderson. Took a lot of Russian out of that name, so it's a little bit of Swedish in it now. First and foremost, on behalf of Rosie and the girls, I want to thank everyone for being here. I know it takes a lot of effort to come over. You know, some people are on planes, some people drove up. It's very much so appreciated. And while Pete initially told me, I can't wait to have this really small gathering, he'd be very excited to see all the faces that are here today. So it's been awesome to have everybody here. And as I think everybody knows, Pete was a very proud member of the San Mateo County Sheriff's Office. And as part of ceremony, we have the honor guard here. So I'd like to welcome the honor guard up. Oh, yes, and if you can, please stand for the honor guard. So to set some expectations for today, we're going to have a number of speakers that come up and share some memories around Pete. Also at the end of the afternoon, I'll invite people to come up and speak so we can have an open mic session. There's no pressure to do so, but if you feel so inclined and you want to speak about some memories that you do have about Peter, that'd be fantastic. Before I hand it over to his eldest daughter, I did want to say a couple words about Pete and some of my feelings about him. So. I'll do so by sharing a story. So when I was engaged to Natasha, but not yet married, we were at a family holiday party. And if you've ever been to, I'd call it a Moroznikov one. It's really a shack party. It's kind of what it is. There's a lot of shacks in here. And all of you have been around the shacks. You guys get it. And so we're sitting there, and there's like kids running around. Some aunties are bickering about something. I think Eddie brought a full pig. Like there's just bunch of shit going on. It was very chaotic, but also very loving. And I would say that that's kind of the underlying theme of the Shack crew. And so Pete looks at me, and we're not yet married, but engaged, and goes, "Kev, you sure you want to do this?" Like, why do you say that, Pete? He's like, "You're not just marrying her, you're marrying all of them." And I was like, "Huh?" And I come from a very small family, which are all a very strong, lovely family. But as did Pete, right? And so we looked at it and we were talking about it, and I realized the guy was the perfect complement for the chaos that is that crew. He was an extremely pragmatic, very loyal, very matter of fact, and sometimes could be a very stern individual. But those aren't like his defining characteristics. That's just kind of like the surface level of what you get from him. If I really had to say what he was one of the most loving, compassionate, loyal people that I had ever met. And the number one thing that he cared about was taking care of those that he cared for and loved. He wanted to be a provider, and he wanted to make sure that his wife, his girls, and the extended family were really taken care of. And so he would, no matter what, make sure that he put family first. And even if he had to have tough conversations, there's several people in this room that he's had those with, and myself included. And so I take a look at him, and I take a look at the way that he worked within the family, and it was a very cherished thing that I know that myself and my co-brother-in-laws, son-in-laws, we look at and think that, that guy really paved the way. That's how you get it done. Like that guy, when you're dealing with anyone, you're dealing with a family, he really was the gold standard. And I always think about a time when Natasha and I were having Nate, like I did anything. Like I did one thing. Like she did the rest of the work. But when Nate was first born, we actually lived in Rose and Pete's backyard. They have a little cottage there. We weren't like in a tent. So in the backyard, and Pete was always so gracious to me, and I remember always thinking, like, this guy's sitting here, couldn't have a bigger smile on his face, and his deadbeat son-in-law is like rolling into the house, like, what's for dinner, and did anybody change my baby? Like, you need to make sure, like, but that's the man he was. He was very much so, would have conversations with me around, like, hey, I love you, love the way that you take care of my daughter, and she's one of the most important things in the world to me, and now my grandson. I have faith in you as far as, the provider you can be. And he was just such a great patriarch for our family and somebody that really set the tone for the way in which we treat each other. So even though he's gone, he still lives on, I know, through all of us in the way of memories, in the way of stories in which we'll tell. But he definitely impacted us in the way in which we treat each other and that our family interacts with each other. And for that, like, be forever grateful. He was one of the best men I've ever met in my entire life. Miss him dearly, but couldn't be more grateful that he was a part of it. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Tanya, who can speak about her father.
Hi, guys. It's so nice to see so many amazing, wonderful friends and family here. I know I've spoken to quite a few of you already. So please, if we haven't met and you're part of my dad's inner circle and we have not met you, please come and say hi to us. I love that usually people come late to these things. You all showed up like an hour and a half early. Maybe it was the open bar. I don't really know. But I don't know. Maybe it was the handicap parking. Sorry. There's a lot of older people here. All right, so let's... Anyway, so I'm Tanya's firstborn daughter. On behalf of myself, my sisters, and my mom, I thank you for coming today. I'm going to try and read this, but it's so fake. I hate reading off of paper. But we are humbled and by the outpouring of love and support that we have received from our family and friends. It's a true testament of my dad's character and who he was and how people admired him. I actually am going to go off script right now. I was actually going through my mom's emails, trying to upgrade her computer and do some things a couple days ago. And I just read all the emails that came in from people over when my dad passed and when he was ill. And I just started crying because they were really wonderful. And I hadn't cried for him in when he died, about 3 weeks. So I have these... I'm just going to tell you the grieving process is not linear for a lot of people. It goes up and down. So for me, it's been depression, anxiety, solemnness, not being very forgetful, and not always crying. Like, it's really good to cry. I wish I cried more. So when I read those emails, it was really a great outlet for me to cry because it just was. I don't know why, but thank you for that. Thank you for all your emails, whoever sent them. I know you know who you are. As you've seen, we've all worn blue today in honor of my dad because of his beautiful blue eyes. We were all very envious of. And my mom always reminding us of that none of us got his beautiful blue eyes. But that's not our fault because the Shaq genes are strong. As we all know, in many ways, more than just physical. My dad was loving, funny, kind, private, and sometimes, very stern. It's kind of scary. After you got to know him and you peel the when you peeled the layers away, you saw what a squishy love puppet he was, right? Many of our high school friends are here, and some of us, like, they literally lived at our house for years at end. And I mean, you must have been a special kind of person to feel comfortable enough just to sleep over our house and just to crash all the time and eat out of our fridge and yeah, just do you, right, guys? Right, Natalie, Melanie, Dempy, Sarah. Oh, wait, Christy's not here, but VAL. I already said that. He was also a loving and adoring grandfather, always coming up with nicknames for the kids. They especially loved his old cop stories and his banana pancakes he made for us too when we were little. I know he's going to really miss them, and I know he hung on as long as he could for them and for my mom. So my dad had cancer for 5 years, and he struggled. He was very sick for a long time, and he didn't have a lot of good days. I would say about 85% of his days were just not good. So, but there were the days that were good, and we could see him and spend time with him. And those are the days he cherished, and that's what made him pull through, and that's why he put himself through so many different medications, and he put himself through so much when a lot of people, I think, would have just kind of given up and just said, I'm not doing this anymore. Like, this is too much. And I think he honestly mostly did it for my mom. He loved her so much, and they loved each other so much. He didn't want to leave her, but he knew she would be in really, really wonderful hands. We are so grateful for my dad. And how much he enjoyed life with our mom by his side. They had a love that was one of a kind. He adored her, and she him. After he passed, I said this out loud. I said, my dad loved us, my three sisters and I, but he adored my mom. So that there is a thing. I knew he loved us, and as a father loves a daughter, but he adored my mom. And he looked at her like I've never seen him look at anybody. Ever. There's one thing that I think we can all take from my dad is he would say, people make life too difficult, too complicated. You are born, you get a job, right? You're born, you get a job, you work hard, you take care of your family, and you try and be a good person. That's it. Don't make it complicated, because that's where things get messy. He always gave the best advice to all of us. Doing the most ridiculous things I would talk to him about. He always made me laugh at myself because I was ridiculous with some of my issues were just so stupid. Coming back, like my sisters got married before I did. That was a big problem. So, yeah, that was not good. So my dad touched a lot of people in his life, from family, our childhood, friends, work colleagues. Our friends even coined the playful nickname Mr. Pete because of his growing up around him. He had this very stern way about him, and we always had curfews. No one had curfews, right? All our friends would be like, why do you have to call your dad? Why do you have to page your dad that you're coming home late? And I'm like, well, I'm sorry, your parents are just kind of strict, and nobody really cared that, they could be home whenever hours of the night. And our friends, my dad was like, if you're not home by 11, you page or you call us, and that's it. You check in. And so that kind of started with Mr. Pete. He was also a big supporter of AA. He made many friends there, and he helped a lot of people in their journey to find peace and sobriety. Some of you are here. Please come up to us. We'd love to talk to you. Lastly, we'd like to thank the true angels that were there for my dad in his final days. He left this earth in peace, with little pain, with my mom by his side. Since my dad has passed, Natasha has said there were so many beautiful moments in his final days. True love, a tribe of selfless people, and endless support. We are trying to focus on those moments. We have also seen a few signs from my dad that have been an incredible reminder that he's still with us. Thank you so much for coming. And I'm not sure who else I'm supposed to call. Oh, here we go. Mark Weiss, you're up. Thank you, guys. All right, guys, Mark is my cousin, very beloved cousin, and my dad and Mark had a very special relationship.
All right, so there's going to be some repetitive information going on here, but all of you know Pete, and everything's pretty consistent with Pete. So, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome, and I'm glad you're all here. As Tanya mentioned, I'm Pete and Rose's nephew, and I'm grateful and honored to be here to share some memories, stories, and the history about Pete as I knew him. My earliest memory of Pete was visiting Pete and Rose's home in San Mateo. It's a home I'll never forget. I always remember it because it was on Magnolia Street, and there was this huge magnolia tree out in front. I think I used to climb it quite a bit as a kid, but it was beautiful. And actually, I ended up working on the peninsula quite a bit and drove around that neighborhood often, and I would revisit that house to see that tree. Eventually, the owners tore it down. It was a little bit of a sad time, but it was a fond memory of that house. About that time, I was about 7 years old or so, and I remember my uncle was a cop. He talked about driving a Porsche, and his hobby was horses. But not only did Pete ride horses, he was a calf roper, a real cowboy. So in my eyes, Pete equated to the guy like on the Dos Equis beer commercial, the most interesting man in the world. I was 7 years old, horses, cop, Porsche, it's all good. And it was also the house where I first met my cousins, Tanya, Laura, and Natasha, for the first time. In '78, the family moved to Burlingame, and this is significant because for many years to come, Pete and I would routinely talk about real estate, finances, and investing. When they bought their home on Walnut, I was maybe like 12 years old or so, but I remember him telling me when it came time for me to buy a home, to try and find one with an in-law unit so you could get it rented out and get additional income. Needless to say, this was the beginning of Pete's guidance in my life, 12 years old. What really sticks in my mind, and you heard a little bit about this, is the holidays at the house, namely Christmas Eve. Of course, every family gathers for the holidays, but when it came to these events, there was a huge undertaking based on the size of Rose's side of the family. Like Kevin said, I come from a relatively small family, so these were huge, huge gatherings, sometimes 30, 40 or more people involved. So it was massive. This is also where I kind of got introduced to Jerry and the friendship that Jerry and Pete had and how they made each other laugh. And then obviously when Pete disappeared to go do some things, Jerry made us all laugh. He just had that thing. So he was great. I remember watching Pete calmly manage the night, offering drinks as people arrived, moving about the house, making sure everyone was taken care of, keeping an eye on us kids in his gorgeous home, and always gently nudging Rose to stay on track in the kitchen so everyone could eventually eat. After graduating from high school, Pete and Jerry, everybody knows those two were partners in just about everything, helped me get a part-time job at the sheriff's office. On weekends, I would take low-level offenders out and do community service instead of spending their weekend in jail. At the same time, I was attending college and pursuing a career as a firefighter. Little did I know that part-time job would turn into a career for myself at the sheriff's office. From my first day there, Pete told me, it's best that we not let anybody know about our relationship, as nepotism has its pros and its cons. Of course, this was sage advice. I recently had the opportunity to go to the office and review Pete's personnel file. This was an amazing opportunity for me, and I thought I would share with you a little bit about his law enforcement career. Prior to working for the San Mateo Sheriff's Office, Pete served a couple years with the San Francisco County Sheriff's Office. A wise move to make that change. In total, he worked for 5 San Mateo County Sheriff's Office, one of them which is here. Thank you, Don. Pete was a deputy sheriff for 6 years, a sergeant for 11 years, and a lieutenant for 11 years. Pete's niche in law enforcement was civil enforcement. As I went through his file, it was clear he was an expert in this area. Here are just a few excerpts that describe Pete. One is an employee performance evaluation. During this rating period, Sergeant Morosnikoff was assigned to the Civil Bureau as a writ enforcement officer specializing in complex cases. He's extremely competent and the backbone of the Bureau. Sergeant Morosnikoff consistently conducts himself as a professional. He has acquired a statewide reputation as an expert in the field of civil law and procedures. Private attorneys and our district attorney, who's also here, consulted with him based on his expertise. Pete is responsible for training all law enforcement officers in the county on civil law at the College of San Mateo. In addition to his duties as a writ enforcement officer, Pete also supervises 6 deputy sheriff process servers. He's strict but fair in his supervisory duties and is respected by staff. Much like everybody said, I've heard this from my cousins throughout the years, Mr. Pete, always firm but fair. I found countless letters of commendation from law firms, attorneys at law, our own county council, and they all praise Pete. Here's one of them. Dear Sheriff McGuire, this letter is written in praise of 2 of your employees, Sergeant Pete Morosnikoff and Deputy George Warden. George used to be one of my sergeants, by the way. These 2 deputies performed eviction services on my behalf. Your officers performed the required tasks with skill, tact, and speed. I realized to evict someone from their home is an unpleasant task at best. Sergeant Morosnikoff and Deputy Warden were able to remove the occupant from the resident without incident, although they were met with considerable resistance. Please forward my thanks to these fine officers and your Civil Bureau staff for a job well done. In 1992, Sheriff Cardoza reorganized the Sheriff's Office and he created a Civil and Records Bureau to be overseen by a lieutenant. And Pete was the obvious choice. Now, the Sheriff's Office is located on the 3rd floor of the Hall of Justice. As a young deputy, you didn't step foot on the 3rd floor, as that was kind of for the administration and the elite. The Civil and Records Bureau was also on the 3rd floor, and Pete's office was located in the back corner. I would occasionally sneak back and visit with him. His office was huge, and it had its own bathroom. This would be equivalent to a C-level executive at a business now, in a corner office with glass views. But this was the sheriff's office. It was a badass office. This office is significant to our relationship, but I'll get to that in a little bit. Then I came across an outside employment approval letter dated July 18th, 1973. And it's funny, in speaking to Keith, I think a little bit earlier, the topic of the Circle Star Theater came up. For those of you that are old enough to remember, there was a theater in San Carlos called the Circle Star Theater. It was a unique venue as the stage rotated 360 degrees during performances, so everyone had a great seat. If you think about it, it's kind of brilliant. I'm not sure why anybody's not doing that now, but with technology and everything, but it's not, as far as I know. As a kid, I remember driving down Highway 101 and keeping an eye out on the billboard to see who was playing. I remember seeing famous performers, names like Chuck Berry, Marvin Gaye, Neil Diamond, Wayne Newton, Bob Hope, and even Frank Sinatra. Pete and other sheriff's office members were hired to provide security for the performers. Circling back to Pete being the most interesting man in the world, seeing photos of him in uniform with celebrities furthered my admiration of my Uncle Pete. In total, Pete served the San Mateo County Sheriff's Office from May 11th, 1970 to March 20th, 1998, 28 years. Ironically, I also served the Sheriff's Office for 28 years. Even though Pete retired in 1998, his service to the Sheriff's Office and the community didn't end. Pete secured a part-time position working at the Coyote Point Firing Range. We're right over there. And he was managing the public's access to the facility. This was a great position to see the Sheriff's Office members come and go on qualification days, and was the perfect amount of connection to maintain after retirement. Now, circling back to Pete's badass office on the 3rd floor. In 2009, I was promoted to the rank of captain, and I was assigned to our support services division. My office was Pete's old office. It was humbling. Insignificant for me to follow in Pete's footsteps and to have worked in the space that he did. And I know we both enjoyed that private bathroom. As a captain, you were responsible for managing the division's budget. At this time we were going through the Great Recession. And finding areas to cut the budget was paramount. Cutting fat is easy. Cutting to the meat, which is eliminating positions, is where the job gets difficult and unpleasant. This is the part where I should be tearing up. The range came under my command and became necessary for me to eliminate that part-time position at the range. Yes, it's true. I had to fire my Uncle Pete. The man who had done so much for me and made me responsible for where I was at that time. After horses, Pete fell in love with the game of tennis. He was an avid player, playing several times a week and more once he retired. I played a little tennis in my early 20s, but transitioned into other sports. However, Pete and I would occasionally meet up and play. He was better than I and always had encouraging advice to better my game. Even though I didn't intend to improve, I took in all the information because any advice from Pete was good advice. When we stopped playing tennis together, we switched to meeting for lunch, and our favorite spot was the Harry's Hofbrau. This was our time to get caught up with the latest gossip at the sheriff's office and what was going on with my career. Law enforcement is demanding, and it can take you down a rabbit hole, leaving the most important things of your life behind. Pete always reminded me to keep it all in perspective and always stay focused on family, as someday the sheriff's office would be behind me and someone would fill my shoes, and what would be left at the end would be my family. From there, we would share the latest updates on our families and eventually talk finances, investing, and real estate. Again, sage advice from Pete, always. In preparing for today, I had many, many, many more stories, thoughts, feelings written down to share with you. The conversations, emails, text messages, and photos shared between my brother, Rose, Tanya, Laura, Natasha, and I just kept fueling my writing. In fact, it was somewhat therapeutic. I just kept writing, and thoughts came, stories came, so I just kept writing. However, when I read back everything, I was going to be up here for like 30 or 40 minutes, and I didn't want to be that guy. This is where the writer's block came in. How would I close and say goodbye? When I wrote something, it just turned into another memory and story. This went on for weeks, and I realized I just didn't want to do it. I didn't want to say goodbye. Instead, I decided I would stand up here and just say, thank you, Pete. Thank you for being my most interesting man in the world. Thank you for taking me under your wing. Thank you for trusting in me and guiding me into a fulfilling and adventurous career. Thank you for advising me on finances and long-term financial security. And thank you for leading by example on how to be a great husband, father, uncle, and friend. Thank you. Next on our agenda is another sheriff's office friend and family, Bill Pedrini. I'm not sure if I'm stealing your emceeing or not, Kevin. Tanya stole it, so I'm stealing it back too.
Thanks, Mark. Good job. Hi, my name's Bill Pedrini. I had the good fortune to meet Pete early in his career when he came to the sheriff's office, and we hit it off right away and became friends that lasted for more than 45 years. Everybody took a liking to Pete right away. He had a great way about him, and he had all these great sayings that most of them you can't repeat in mixed company, but I mean, I still use them today, and people think I came up with them, and they're just great. I don't know where he got those. Well, the department recognized those same qualities in Pete, promoted him to sergeant, then lieutenant. He was the first public information officer in the sheriff's office, dealing with the press, the TV stations at big major events in the sheriff's office. He represented the department in the 4th of July parade, the contingent, which took into his love of horses. He also got involved in the Deputies Association, working to improve conditions for the working deputies. And he was responsible, in part with others, for the largest and most successful fundraising event that organization ever had. And as Mark mentioned, he was a recognized department expert in civil law. Our friendship continued through the years. He, I, Jerry Cohn. I had the added benefit that the Sheriff's Office provides good benefits with vacation, pay, and so forth, but I got the added medical advice of wannabe Dr. Jerry Cohn and Dr. Mraznikov. One thought he had every malady known to man, and poor Pete did. He had way more than his share. We discussed all these over lunch for years and years and years, usually at Uncle Chin's in San Mateo. And even though we all held positions of responsibility, the conversations with Pete could be in three areas. What's new in tennis? What's going on with Home Depot? Or the one we enjoyed the most, the newest goings on with the Shack family. And socially, we took trips to Palm Springs. Later, we took, as groups, we would go once a year to Las Vegas, a group of us. Unfortunately, we had to go in the summertime because, as you know, Pete could be kind of thrifty, and that's when the rates were the cheapest. So he'd be out enjoying sunbathing in 110-degree weather. We'd be in the shade. We took jobs at Circle Star working together. We took jobs at Kenyatta College after we retired. I admired Pete for many things, but I always admired his ability to size up situations and circumstances quickly in this no-nonsense kind of way. Very forthright, very politically incorrect. He would speak out what he saw, but he was almost always correct. I visited him a couple weeks before he passed away, and it was a typical Pete. You know, he said he had no regrets. He'd had a good life. He expressed the disappointment that this is going to mean for his family, his daughters, and for Rose. And he's gone. I'll always have the memories. And I thought it was a privilege to be able to call him my friend. And next to speak is Steve Christensen.
Well, I thought I'd know a few more people than I know here, so I'm a little nervous. But Pete, I will. Pete and I grew up together. We met on a park bench. We were Little League players, and we were third stringers, so we didn't get much chance to play. But we got a lot of time to talk. And we found out our love for horses. Now, one of Pete's uncles had horses up McLaren Park. So Pete and I started going to McLaren Park. And in that time, we ended up buying 2 old horses that were old enough to vote. And Pete and I had those horses for years. And Pete and I ended up being roommates in Twin Peaks with Frank Cobo. And then before that, Pete and I went to Australia, and we spent 1.5 years in Australia. And Pete was always the most focused of any of my friends. He knew what he wanted. And he wanted to be a cop, even then. So when he got back, that's all he really talked about, is getting on the police department. Well, he ended up, that was his first thing that he really wanted. And his second thing was he wanted to meet a beautiful, lovely girl, and he met Roseanne up at our apartment. So that was number 2 in Pete's life. And number 3 is he always wanted to get a beautiful house, which he ended up with. That was number 3 in his life. And probably the most important, he wanted great kids, and I know he has 3 great daughters that he loved dearly. Pete was able to spend a week with me and my wife up there in Santa Rosa. I still have horses, by the way. And we had a little roping arena up there. And Pete was not real sick at this point. And we were talking about maybe him getting a horse if he got better and leaving it at my place, because we rope up there. And that never passed. But I'll tell you what, for me personally, he's going to be dearly missed. Like I said, I knew Pete when I was 11 years old. We became best friends, and we stayed best friends all our lives. I think all of Pete's single life, I was one of his roommates. We were roommates with at Tom Santoro's house, and then in Twin Peaks, and then he got married. But in my case, he's going to be dearly missed, and I'm sure he's being missed by all of his friends and his family. And all I'd like to say is adios, Pete. We'll be visiting you soon.
Thank you so much. Next up, Linda.
I'm Linda Pazin. To Pete's beloved family and friends, to the love of his life, Rose, his loving daughters, Tanya, Natasha, and Laura, and all of his precious grandchildren here with us today. We're all here today to celebrate an extraordinary man. Today I wish to share some words about that man who was such an important part of my family's life and especially shaped my path in life. One who is known to many of us as Mr. Pete, a man that was fiercely devoted to his friends, his fellow officers, his community, to service, and most of all to his beloved family. Mr. Pete was a very special man. He was kind, loyal, fun, optimistic, wise, resilient, a great listener, and so incredibly smart. He treated my family and I as if we were part of his own family. We will forever be grateful for all that he did for us. Mr. Pete saw the potential in so many of us. I remember the time I was sad in school because I did not do well on a test. I think I was like 9 years old at the time. And it felt hopeless, to me. I did not feel like I had my teacher's support. He said, I could do it. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise, he said. Sometimes we just need to work a little harder, and eventually we will get it. He made time for me over the next couple weeks and helped me with my schoolwork. My test went so much better the next time, and because I had more confidence, he believed in me, and that was all I needed at the time. There were all the firsts I got to experience. My first sleepover, my first trip to Tahoe, my first time playing tennis, the yummy dinners Rose prepared, and all the wonderful family gatherings that we've heard about today. Pete was always there. He was there to talk to my parents and explain what a sleepover was. And then there was, of course, that time I dyed my hair black. And that took a few conversations. My family trusted him more than I could say. I've never shared this with anyone, but Mr. Pete always ended conversations with me with a very special saying. He looked at me and I saw that special smile we've all come to know over so many years, and he said, Linda, you've got to reach for the stars and never look back. This was his way of telling me, you got to just go for it. You got this, don't ever give up, and don't let anyone ever tell you otherwise. Mr. Pete believed that anything was possible. He was a role model for so many of us. The impact of this experience was so profound to me. I know my parents and brothers shared so many other similar experiences as well. I'm overwhelmed when I think back to what it did for me in my life, how it instilled confidence in me, and how it inspired me to grow and to do even better than I thought I was capable of at the time. Mr. Pete was a humble person. He was more concerned about what is right than being right, about acting on good ideas, then having the good ideas, about recognizing contribution in others rather than being recognized himself. One day he said to me, he said, Linda, you have a very special talent, but it's so important to serve others. And my hope for you is that you will build leaders of our future and help others advance themselves, because we have to think about what comes after us. More than anything, I will miss all of our conversations. I remember speaking with him at Tanya's house in Danville a few years back. We sat there for over an hour and spoke about so many things. He was so self-taught in so many ways, really just a brilliant man. He loved the stock market and learning about companies. He'd come up with all these companies' names and knew just every little detail about the leaders in the companies and all these things, and it was just amazing. He was passionate about world history. He loved the game of tennis so deeply, both playing and, of course, watching the pros. Mr. Pete loved Palm Springs. He especially loved his dinner dates there with Rose. He could talk forever about how proud he was of all three of his granddaughters and his grandchildren. If you have a person that believes you could do anything, then eventually you start to believe it. Mr. Pete was that person in my life. Thank you for everything. We love you, and I promise you I will serve others, reach for the stars, and I will never look back.
Now, aside from Bill Pedrini, the next speakers are probably the two cutest we have. I'd like to call up my niece, Ella Foster, and my son, Luke Anderson. Yeah. Who's going to go first? Little Louie?
No,
Ella's going to go first? Okay, your words are right up here.
Hi, everybody. I'm Ella. I don't want to say a lot today, but I just wanted to say I'm Grandpa Pete's first grandchild and only one of his two granddaughters. And I wanted to tell you guys the way how I remember him. I remember him by all of his nicknames he had for us. They were all really cool and special to us. So I was Ellie Belly, he was Lukester, and then Izzy was Itsy Bits, Enzo was Enzy Benz, Nate was Nate Dog, and Cade was Cade Man. I just wanted to say I love my grandpa very much and I miss him.
Oh, you forgot to say this. Hold on. You forgot to say this. Hello, my name is Luke, and I've been super sad since my grandpa passed, and that has made me write this. I've done one, and I wrote another one, and I'm gonna read the second one I wrote. Hi, my name is Lukey. My grandpa was a great guy and an even better grandpa. He was nice and he was happy. My favorite part about him is that he was a patriarch. I am so happy to have been in his life.
And now for our favorite lady, Rosie, you want to come up here?
Hello. A little closer, Rosie. A little closer, Mom. Okay, it's just this music gets throwing me off. My hearing aids. There are no words to describe the deep sorrow of losing my beloved Peter. I have been so absolutely blessed to be his wife for the past 48 years. It is not possible to ever fulfill the loss of my beloved husband. Peter was definitely a fair and good man, always there for others. I believe he will always be remembered as a man of very high integrity by the way he lived his life and treated others. He was our treasure. I am so happy he often told me what a good life he had and to always count our many blessings, as we have had many. Now I want to read a little passage. It's not very long. It's called Never Forgotten. You will never be forgotten. That simply cannot be. As long as I am living, I will carry you with me, safely tucked within my heart. Your light will always shine, a glowing ember, never stilled. Throughout the end of time, no matter what the future brings, or what may lie ahead, I know that you will walk with me along the path I tread. So rest, my angel, be at peace, and let your soul fly free. One day I'll join your glorious flight for all eternity. He always used to say, years ago he was in an operation, the first operation, and when I was walking with him before he was going to have his operation and be taken away, I'll never forget, he looked at me and he said, I'll love you forever and ever. And so that was always our little saying that we would say to one another forever and ever. So that's why I love the word eternity in this. I want to thank you all for being here today for Mr. Pete. He would be very honored and very touched. I know he is smiling upon us. I also want to thank our beloved daughters, dearest family, and friends for their love and support in so many ways. Thank you so much for being here. Have a good day.
And as mentioned, if anyone would like to come up and say anything, please feel free to do so.
Gotta wear glasses. Age takes its toll. Well, we lost an extraordinary person in Pete. He was a loving husband, a dedicated father, a devoted grandfather. He was my brother-in-law, my friend, and my doubles tennis partner. So every year, for over 20 years, Pete and Rose, Gloria and I, would vacation in Palm Springs at the Palm Springs Tennis Club. And every year, Pete and I would team up and we'd challenge our Palm Springs competitors. Pete absolutely loved the game. He was a longtime member of the San Mateo Elks Lodge, and he would play there 2 or 3 times a week with his Elks buddies. But tennis wasn't his only passion. When he was younger, as you've probably heard, he was a cowboy. He was part of a two-man roping team. This is real rodeo stuff. A steer, but probably a calf, would run across the arena, and the two riders would come out and rope the calf. The header would rope the head, and the heeler would rope the rear legs. Pete was the heeler. He was definitely a cowboy. He wore a cowboy hat. He wore a cowboy shirt, cowboy boots, and he wore Wrangler jeans. You had to wear Wrangler jeans or you were not a cowboy. Some of his buddies here can attest to that. Pete also loved gardening. It's not exactly a cowboy event, but he took a lot of pride in his garden, and he loved hearing the praise of his neighbors, and his gardens were worthy of a spread in Sunset Magazine. I tried to get him interested in golf. He went numerous times with me, and at the first tee, he was pretty enthusiastic. That lasted about 20 minutes. And around midway through the round, he would say, you know, I'm falling apart like a cheap suit. A lot of people have heard that from him. So Pete really grew to hate golf. And at the end of a frustrating round, Pete would say, and excuse me for this, it's a quote, "The next time you invite me to play golf, I'll just give you my $45, you kick me in the balls, and I'll stay home." Said it many times. So for many years, the family would get together with a lot of friends, and we would have a New Year's celebration. It was dinner and dancing over in Oakland with the Martini Club along Lake Merritt. And it was a great event. And it was sometimes a themed dress, but usually it was black tie. The music was from the 40s big band era. Pete loved the music, and he loved to dance. He was a great dancer. I mean, I never really danced with him, but my wife would remind me constantly how great of a dancer he was. I had something to shoot for. Now, Pete was a ladies' man in his younger years, driving his Porsche, very well dressed. He always dressed nicely, flashing his blue eyes at all of the ladies. And he and his friends were regular hangouts at Zach's in Sausalito. But one of his friends told him, "Well, hang out near the women's restroom because eventually all of the women are going to come by you, and you'll have your pick." So, well, his philandering ways came to a real halt when he met Rose. They married, had 3 wonderful daughters, Tanya, Laura, and Natasha, and he became the devoted family man that we all wished us to become. Now, my daughter Danielle reminded me of 2 of his signature traits. He always wore men's cologne at any event that he went to. You all remember that. And he always carried that damn handkerchief in his pocket. He'd pull it out, he'd wipe his nose and stick it back in his pocket. He was never without that handkerchief. I'm going to miss Pete. I'm going to miss his funny stories, his great sense of humor, mostly his friendship. Thank you.
Anyone else? No? Wrong mic. Right mic? Right mic. Would anyone else like to speak?
I like to say one thing Gene missed. The other thing Pete used to do, and he did it for many years until he got farther back in his career. When he take that hair in front,
Oh, yeah.
and he looked like Bill Haley in the comics. Like Bill Haley. Remember that, Gene?
So, kind of similar to what Mark said earlier. Like, how do you put a bow on this? How do you finish? How do you close? And I don't think there is a good way to do it with somebody like Peter, or someone that, anyone that you love. What I know is that to everyone in here, he was either a great husband, great brother, great father, great uncle, great friend. So my ask is I had a beer. My ask is, as we have the space till 5 o'clock, if you choose to stick around, please share some stories around a person that was very much so loved, one of the greatest guys that I've ever met in my life. He lives on through all of us, either through our memory or through the stories in which we have and the behaviors in which we act on. So to Mr. Pete, we love you very much. Gonna miss you very much. And have a lovely time.
Well, Uncle Pete, you were such an influential and an amazing influence on me growing up. Being that you lived a couple blocks away from us, we spent so much time together as family. Pete was always, you knew where you stand with Uncle Pete. He could be hard on you, but always told the truth, and super loving. And didn't necessarily always show it with a lot of affection, but he showed it in action, how he treated his family, how he treated me. Because of my Uncle Pete, I learned to ride horses. So he used to take my sister and I out and ride horses in Atherton, something that he loved, something that we loved, and it became such an affinity for my sister that horses are her favorite animal. So I think Uncle Pete had a huge influence on that. Uncle Pete, I'll miss you tremendously. You are one of the men that I admire so much. What you've done with your daughters, your wife, your family, me. It's so tough to see you go, and I'll miss you tremendously. I love you, Uncle Pete.
Mr. Pete, just wanted to say we miss you. We're all thinking of you, and you've inspired a lot of us dads to have daughters. Didn't quite get to 3 like you, but if you can do it, we'll be following in your footsteps. It's hard being here without you and seeing your smile. We miss you and we love you.
Mr. Pete, we miss you. We love you. I learned most of my dance moves from you at one of the weddings or family parties we were at. Brooks picked on me about it all the time, but you had some amazing dance moves and a beautiful family. Much love.
Hey, Mr. Pete. We're here for you today, and I will say I woke up this morning and I was watching Brooks get dressed, and I was thinking, I can't believe that today is about you and you're not going to be here. And I was really worried about coming here and feeling really sad that you weren't here. But when I walked in the door and there was this big picture of you with your big smile, I said, there's Mr. Pete, he's here. And so I know you're here, and that feels right. So I love you, I miss you, rest in peace, and we'll see you again on the other side. Love you.
Hi, Mr. Pete. The first thing I think of when I think of you is your blue eyes and your big smile, and it's like home. So I really appreciate everything that you did for us when we were young and now, and you're always there. And I just remember walking into your house and you're sitting on the couch and, hey girls, like, oh, we're taking over once again. So anyways, thank you for just being an amazing all-around wonderful guy, and you're a father figure for all of us, and I really appreciate it and love you so much.
So this is my story about my dad. This has made me realize he was really funny, a funny person, had really funny humor. I was probably like 10 or 11 years old, and I had a lot of anxiety about plane crashes. And I was talking to him about plane crashes, and then I saw a movie about what if there's a plane crash and there's a one engine, because there's one engine plane crash versus 2 engine. And I said, Dad, what if what if you're in an airplane and the one engine dies? What do you do? Because I'm like, and I'm expecting him to give me some sage advice. He goes, well, this is what you do. He's like, you tighten your seatbelt really hard, and you suck in your belly, and you put your head down towards your knees, and then you kiss your ass goodbye.
then
love that! I remember that. Oh
and
my
I was
God.
like, what? You're like, and then I was like, I'm like, Dad, that's funny. Okay, I get
I
it.
could totally see that.
Because I was really listening.
Yeah.
Okay, that's it.
Dad, you'd be so proud of what we have done to celebrate you and your life. You have so many people that love you and admire you, so many funny stories. Kevin was your MC like you wanted, and that was great. We were all here for you. I love you forever. I miss you forever. And I hope someday I will see you again.
So Dad, we've had such closeness throughout our entire life. The last few months I came up and I tried to do as much as I could because I live down south, but I wanted to be there for your every need, and I hope that I did. I wanted to see the good in the bad and everything because you gave us everything. We have a wonderful life because you provided it for us and you paved the way. So I am indebted to you. I love you so much. I always will. And all I can say is I truly hope we meet again.
But in all seriousness, I have 3 beautiful children, and I could not have had them without your permission and honor of marrying your daughter, Laura. We're going to miss you, and I love you.
My name is Enzo. I'm Adam. I love you, and we used to go to play with each other, and we used to play in the garage, and we used to go to eat, and I think that's it.
Okay. What do you want to say to Grandpa Pete? What do you want to say? I love you, Grandpa Pete.
I love you, Grandpa Pete.
And I miss you.
And I miss you.
Good.
All right. Hi, Grandpa. I know you're in heaven, and I remember you because I remember I wanted to be like a cop like you. Thank you for being my grandpa.